The main hall of the Adeyemi group glowed white as a jewelry case, and Funk planted herself right in the middle of the walkway, one hand on her hip, the other snapping a finger toward the revolving door. A night shift floor scrubber wants to walk in here. That belly, that necklace you fished out of a bin. You think you can slip into a party for real people? Amara did not step back. She laid one hand on her stomach, and with the other, she touched the chain at her throat. Funk yanked a cleaning rag off the cart and threw it straight at Amara's chest. Out before I call security to drag that pregnant belly to the curb. More than 30 guests in evening dress stood and watched. Not one of them moved. One of them turned his face away and sipped his wine. Amara bent down, picked up the rag, folded it. Then she tilted the back of the necklace into the light. 2 letters cut into the metal, an A and a T. That was the moment Tund stepped out of the elevator. The glass in his hand slid loose and shattered on the stone floor. Funk did not yet know that in 15 minutes, the audit she had buried for 3 years would dig itself up in front of the whole board. Karma always has an address, and it has never once knocked on the wrong door. Hit like, subscribe, and drop the name of the city you're listening from. Before we rewind 3 years, to the day Amara was first pushed out of this very building. 3 years earlier, the Adeyemi group did not look like a jewelry case. It looked like a place where work got done. The lobby had scuffed marble and a coffee machine that ate your coins 2 times out of 5. Amara Adeyemi, no. She was not an Adeyemi yet. She was Amara Okoro then, a name she'd stopped saying out loud within a year. Amara Okoro walked in every morning at 7:40, before her floor filled up because she liked the quiet. She was a senior accountant. She was very good at it. Numbers did not lie to her the way people did. She had a habit. She'd tell you. It was a small thing. Every time a column balanced, she pressed her thumb once against the edge of her desk. A little tap, like knocking on wood. Her mother had done the same over a butcher's ledger in a market stall for 30 years. Amara didn't notice she did it. Other people did. Tunde. Adeyemi noticed. He was the founder's son, running the finance division back then, before his father's heart gave out and left him the whole thing. He was not a soft man. He had a way of asking a question that made you feel like the answer was already written down somewhere, and you were just failing to read it to him. But with Amara, he asked questions and then actually listened, which is rarer in rich men than people admit. They did not fall in love the way it happens in the films. There was no rain, no music. There was a spreadsheet, a quarterly reconciliation that would not close. 41,000 naira floating loose in a suspense account. And the 2 of them in a conference room at 9 at night, eating cold jollof out of the same takeaway container, because neither would go home until the number was found. Amara found it. A transposition error, 2 digits swapped buried 9 tabs deep. She pressed her thumb to the table. You do that a lot, Tunde said. Do what? Knock on the desk, when it balances. She looked at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. My mother did it. I didn't know I still did. He did not say anything smooth, he said. Keep doing it, and looked back down at the screen, and something in the room had changed, and both of them knew it, and neither said a word about it for another 4 months. There was a third person in that finance division who saw all of it. Funk Balogun. Funk had been there 2 years longer than Amara. She had a corner desk she'd earned by seniority, and a laugh she used like a tool, loud when a manager could hear it, gone the second they left. She was the one who trained Amara in the first week, who showed her which coffee machine to avoid, and which director never read past the first page of a report. Amara had liked her. That is the part that stayed sharp for years afterward. The small, humiliating splinter of it. Amara had genuinely liked her. Funk had wanted Tund for a long time. Not in the way you want a person. In the way you want a promotion, a good apartment, a name that opens doors. She had done the arithmetic on him the way she did arithmetic on everything. And Amara Okoro, a butcher's daughter with a thumbtap habit, was not supposed to be in the equation at all. Funk had another habit, and this one matters, so hold on to it. She never carried her own access card up to the 4th floor records room. She'd forget it, or say she forgot it, and borrow someone else's. Just for a second, love. I left mine at my desk, and go up alone. People lent it to her without thinking. She was Funk. She'd been there forever. Amara lent hers more than once. The records room was where the wire transfer authorizations lived. Paper backups, printed and signed, in case the system was ever audited. It was also, though nobody thought about this, the one room in the building where the ceiling camera had been dead for 8 months, because the maintenance ticket kept getting closed as low priority. Funky knew the camera was dead. She'd checked. Here is what she did over the course of that year, and I'm going to tell it to you plainly, because it was a plain crime dressed up later as something complicated. She moved money. Small amounts first, riding inside legitimate vendor payments. A few 100,000 naira skimmed off inflated invoices from a supplier that was really just a bank account she controlled through her cousin. Then larger, she was patient. She was, in her own poisoned way, as good with numbers as Amara was, and every authorization she pushed through, she logged under a borrowed access card. Mostly Amara's. Because Amara lent it without thinking, and because Amara was rising, and because, if it ever came apart, the smartest thing in the world would be to have the newest, most noticed, most invited person holding the match. The engagement happened in the spring. Tunde did not do it at a restaurant. He did it in the same conference room, the cold jollof room, and he did not kneel because he said, kneeling was for men who needed the drama to distract from the question. He just asked. She said yes, with her thumb pressed to the table. Funk smiled at the engagement lunch. She brought a card. She wrote something warm in it. Amara kept that card for a long time, too, and later could not decide which was worse. The rag thrown at her chest 3 years on, or the card. The collapse came in October. It came fast, the way these things do, engineered to look like a dam breaking rather than a switch being flipped. An anonymous tip to the board's audit committee. A preliminary internal review. And then a number on a screen in a conference room that was not the cold jollof room. A bigger one. Colder. With the whole finance leadership around the table, and Amara, at the far end, not yet understanding that she was not there as an accountant. She was there as the accused. 11 million naira. Gone over 11 months through wire authorizations logged under her access card. "These are your credentials," said the head of the audit committee, a careful man named Mr. Okonkwo, who did not enjoy this and did it well anyway. "This is your login. These timestamps place the activity during your working hours." "They're not." "I lent my card," Amara said, and heard how it sounded the instant it left her mouth. "I lent my card," the oldest, weakest, guiltiest sounding sentence a person can say. People borrow cards all the time. Everyone does. I lent it to. To whom? And this is the hinge of the whole thing, so watch it turn. Amara opened her mouth to say Funk's name, and she looked down the table, and Funk was looking back at her with an expression of such open, wounded, disappointed sympathy. The exact face of a friend watching a friend. Lie that Amara faltered. For 1 full second she doubted her own memory. Had she lent it to Funk? Or had she just lent it to whoever, generally, and was now grabbing the nearest name to save herself? The doubt was small, and it was fatal, because it showed on her face, and in a room reading her for guilt. 1 second of doubt looked exactly like a caught liar, improvising. To whom, Miss Okoro? Mr. Okonkwo asked again gently. I lent it to several people. I can't, so you cannot say. I'm being set up. She said it too loud. In that room at that volume, it landed like every guilty person who has ever said it. Funk spoke then quietly, for the first time. Amara. Her voice cracked beautifully on the second syllable. Why didn't you just tell me you needed money for your mother's treatment? We all would have helped you. You didn't have to do this. Amara had never told Funk her mother was sick. She had told exactly one person in that building. Her mother was sick. She turned and looked at Stunned. He was sitting very still at the head of the table, and his face had gone somewhere she had never seen it go. Somewhere shut and formal, the face he used for hostile vendors. And she understood in a cold, slow wave that Funk had gotten to him first. That whatever had been said in private, over days, drop by drop. Her mother's illness, a fact only he had known, had been fed back into the room as evidence of Amara's motive, and the only way Funk could have known it was from him, and the only way it made sense to him now was if Amara had been lying to everyone all along. And she looked around that table at the faces already closed against her, at Funk's brimming eyes, at the man she was going to marry calling her by her surname, and something in her that had been holding the door shut simply let go. So she said nothing. She stood up. She took off her access card and set it on the table, and she walked out, and the silence behind her was not the silence of people who believed her. She was 4 weeks pregnant that day. She found out 3 days later in a pharmacy bathroom, holding a plastic stick and shaking. And she did not tell him. That was the decision that shaped everything after. And I want you to sit with why she made it, because it is the moral engine of this whole story. And it is not simple. She did not stay silent to punish him. She stayed silent because she had just learned, in the most complete way a person can learn it, that her word was worth nothing against a beautiful lie and a spreadsheet. If she went to Tunde now, pregnant, with no proof, the story wrote itself. The disgraced accountant, caught stealing, plays her last card. She could already hear Funk's soft voice explaining it. And if he looked at her belly, the way he'd looked at her across that table, she would not survive it. She chose the wound she could carry over, the one she couldn't. Amara buried her mother and had her son and named him Akin, which means praise, because she had decided that even a life this stripped down was going to have praise in it if she had to manufacture the praise herself. Now come forward, 3 years, to a building that no longer looks like the place where work gets done. Tunde rebuilt it after his father died. New glass, new name over the door in brushed steel, Adeyemi Group. The marble no longer scuffed. The coffee machine replaced with a thing that costs more than a car and makes a foam leaf on top of your latte. He poured the grief and the guilt of that year into the company, and the company grew monstrous on it. He was, by every measure the market uses, a triumph. He had not married Funk. That is worth saying. Funk had expected him to, in the clean, grateful aftermath of Amara's disgrace, expected to slide into the empty seat. And Tunde had not been able to do it, and could not have told you why. And Funk, who had waited and calculated and won, discovered that the prize had a door that would not fully open. She rose instead. She made herself indispensable. Within 2 years, she was head of financial operations. The very office that once caught a thief, now run by the thief, which is the kind of joke the universe tells with a straight face. And Amara scrubbed floors, not out of failure of ambition. Out of arithmetic, the honest kind. A disgraced accountant with no reference, and an 11 million naira fraud on her name does not get hired to do accounts. She'd tried. The first 18 months were a slammed door with a different logo each time. What she could get Cash, no questions, night shift. So she could be with Akeen in the daytime, was cleaning. She took it, she was not too proud. Pride had been beaten out of her in a cold conference room, and what grew back in its place was harder and quieter, and did not care what a job was called. She was good at that too. She was good at everything she gave herself to. It was almost a curse. She cleaned the way she'd audited, in a system, corner to corner, and the supervisor, who never learned her last name, said she was the best he had. She worked 3 buildings on a rotation, and 11 months ago, the rotation had put her, by an administrative coincidence she had no way to see coming, back inside the Adeyemi group. She did not recognize it at first. The name was the same, but the building was reborn. And she came in at 11 at night, when the executives were gone, and left at 4 before they arrived. And for 11 months, she cleaned the 41st floor of the company that had destroyed her, and never once laid eyes on the man who ran it. That is not a coincidence stretched too far. That is simply what class does in a modern building. It schedules the poor, for the hours the rich are asleep, so the two worlds share every surface and never share a room. She cleaned Tundi's office. She wiped the glass of his desk. There was a photograph on a shelf, turned slightly toward the window. And one night, she picked it up to dust under it, and it was the two of them. Cold jollof room. Someone had caught them laughing over the closed reconciliation, and Amara stood in the dark office at 2 in the morning, holding it, and did not cry, because she had used up crying, but she stood there a very long time. Then she set it back at the exact angle she'd found it, because she was a professional, and she finished the floor. She never took anything. I want to be precise about this, because it is where the story turns, and it has to be earned. Amara cleaned the offices of the wealthy for 3 years, and she never took anything, not a pen, not a coin from a desk drawer, not once. And it was not because she was a saint. It was because the one thing they had not been able to take from her in that conference room was the truth of what she actually was. And she was not a thief, and she would die on that hill quietly, in an empty office, at 2 in the morning, with no one watching to give her credit for it. That is the purest kind of honesty there is, the kind with no audience. Then came the night of the folder. It was a Wednesday, 3 weeks before the gala. Amara was cleaning the 40th floor, financial operations, Funk's floor, though she still did not know whose floor it was. Someone had left in a hurry. There was a paper folder half fallen behind a credenza, wedged where the cleaning cart didn't reach, and Amara pulled it out to clean behind it, and it came open in her hands and paper slid across the carpet. She should have just gathered it up. Any sensible person gathers it up and puts it on the desk and moves on. But Amara Okoro had been a senior accountant, and you can take the job from the accountant, but you cannot take the accountant from the eye, and her eye caught, before her judgment could stop it, a wire authorization printout. She crouched there on Funka's carpet at 1 in the morning, and she read it the way she used to read, fast, the whole shape of it at once. It was a vendor payment, a supplier called Meridian Holdings, and something about it was wrong, in a way she felt in her teeth before she could name it. The way you feel a chord is wrong before you know which note. The invoice number sequence didn't breathe right. Real vendors invoice in a rhythm, gaps, weekends, holidays. These were too even, too clean. Someone had generated them to look organic, and had been, like all careful liars, a fraction too careful. And then she saw the authorizing credential line, and her own 3-year-old wound opened up cold and precise, because she knew that pattern. She had lived inside that pattern. Payments authorized under one card, always the same window of the day, always when the real holder of the card could be shown to be elsewhere. It was the same architecture. It was the exact same crime. Someone in this building was running the identical scheme that had been hung around her neck, and whoever it was had been doing it for a while, and was good, and was still here. Amara knelt on the carpet with the paper in her hand and understood 3 things in the space of about 10 seconds. One, she had, by pure accident, found proof that the machine which convicts people like her is real and reusable, and was being used again in this very building. 2. Whoever was doing this was almost certainly the same person who had done it to her, because the method is a signature and criminals reuse what works. 3. She was a night cleaner, holding a stolen glance at a document she had no right to have seen, and if she said one word, the story would write itself again. The disgraced ex-accountant, the known thief, caught going through the papers of the very department that fired her, no doubt trying to steal or extort. Every true thing she said would sound like a better lie again. She had a choice on that carpet, and both roads were open, and I'm not going to pretend the ugly one wasn't real. She could have photographed it. She could have used it. A woman with a fatherless child and a name in ruins, holding the thing that could ransom the person who ruined her. There is a version of Amara that stands up off that carpet and becomes something hard and transactional, and nobody watching would have blamed her much. That is not what she did. She gathered every page. She squared the stack, the way you square a stack, tapped it on the carpet, and she put it back in the folder, and she stood, and she set the folder squatter in the center of the desk, where its owner would find it and know it had been seen. And then, because she was an accountant before she was anything and an honest one to the marrow, she did the one thing that would turn out to matter more than all the rest. On the cleaning log by the door, the sheet, where night staff initial each room and note anything unusual, a genuine document, dated, time-stamped, filmed by the working lobby camera when she dropped it in the box at shift's end. She wrote one careful line in her small square hand, found finance documents on floor behind credenza, RM 4011, returned to desk. Possible filing error, recommend review. She did not sign her full name. She signed the initials the agency used for night staff. She went home. She made Akeen his breakfast at 5 in the morning, with her eyes burning. And she told herself she had done the right thing. And the right thing had, as usual, changed nothing. She was wrong about that. That the cleaning log went where cleaning logs go, into a facilities file. Nobody reads. But it was dated. It was time-stamped. It existed in writing, outside Funk's control, 3 weeks before anything else happened, and it placed a set of specific finance documents in a specific room on a specific night, with an honest note recommending review. Amara did not know it yet, but she had just fired the first shot, and she'd fired it not with a threat, but with the truth. Quietly, the way she pressed her thumb to a desk when a column balanced. Here is the thing about buildings that grow monstrous. They attract watchers. Tundi had taken the company public in the 2nd year, and public companies get audited by people who do not care whose office it is. And that spring the board had hired an outside firm to do a full forensic review of financial operations, ahead of a new bond issue. Routine. Box ticking. The kind of thing that finds nothing 99 times out of 100. The lead auditor was a woman named Ada Nwosu. She was 51. She had done this for 26 years, and she had the specific gift of the great forensic accountant, which is not brilliance. It is patience combined with a total immunity to being charmed. Funk could not charm her. Funk tried. Funk was warm and helpful, and produced every document promptly and made the coffee and Ada Nwosu wrote, in her notebook, in her own private shorthand, the single word over helpful, and underlined it. Ada found the Meridian Holdings payments the way Amara had found them, by the rhythm. Because that is how they are always found. She pulled the vendor file. She requested the wire authorizations. And she asked facilities, as forensic auditors always do, because it is on their checklist, and no one else ever thinks it matters, for the badge access logs, and the maintenance records, and the visitor logs, and the cleaning logs, for the relevant floors for the relevant period. A junior facilities clerk, bored, printed her everything, including a night cleaning log with a small square handwritten note 3 weeks old. Found finance documents on floor behind credenza R, M4011, return to desk. Possible filing error, recommend review. Ada Nwasu read that line and stopped. She read it again. A cleaner had found finance documents loose on the floor, in the room where her own audit had just located the anomalous vendor. And this was the part that made her sit back, recommended review. A thief does not recommend review. A person covering something does not write it down and date it. This was an honest note, and honest notes in a dishonest file are the loose thread you pull. She went, looking for the badge logs on the Meridian authorizations. And here is where Funk's one clever, patient, fatal habit finally turned on her. 3 years late, every Meridian wire had been authorized under a borrowed access card. Funk had never used her own. Across 2 years, she had used the cards of 6 different colleagues, always people who were demonstrably elsewhere at the moment of authorization, so that the card holder always had an alibi. And the transaction always looked like it belonged to someone careless rather than someone criminal. It was, honestly, elegant. It had one flaw, and it was the flaw of all elegant crimes. It required a person who was always in the room and never on the card. Subtract every cardholder who had an alibi, and one silhouette remained, the same silhouette, in the room every single time, holding no card of her own. Ada Nwasu did not need to prove Funky used the cards. She needed only to prove Funky was the constant. She built a grid 6 cards, 31 transactions, 2 years, every cardholder placed elsewhere by their own badge data. At the moment their card was used 4 floors up, and one person pulled from the 40th floor badge logs, from the parking gate, from the very coffee machine payment records. Tunde had installed to track spending physically present in the building, on the correct floor. In the correct 15-minute window, 31 times out of 31. Confidence in Ada Nwasu's private notebook moved from moderate to high. Then she pulled the archived records, room, camera footage, expecting nothing, because the room where the paper authorizations were kept had a camera that had been dead for years. It was dead now. But Tunde's renovation had added a second camera in the corridor outside, a good one, and it had not been dead. And it had been quietly filming the door of the records room for the entire period. Ada requested the corridor footage for the 31 windows. It took a technician 9 days to pull it all. It was worth the 9 days. One figure. Same walk, same badge tap. On the borrowed cards, in and out with a folder. The corridor camera had a clock burned into the corner, and the clock matched the wire timestamps to the minute. And there was one more thing, the smallest thing, the thing that turns a strong case into a case a person confesses to. In the 4th month of the scheme, Funk had sent an email. Not a stupid one. Funk was not stupid, but a human one. To her cousin, the one whose bank account was Meridian Holdings, and it said only, in careful, vague language, that the next disbursement would be delayed a week, because there was too much attention on the department right now, and she needed things quiet. She had deleted it. She had deleted it from her sent folder the same afternoon. She had not known, because most people do not know, that a company under a bond issue puts a legal hold on all email, and mirrors it to an archive the moment the process begins, and that the archive does not care what you delete from your own folder, and that a forensic auditor with a subpoena reads the archive, not your folder. Adenowasu had all of it 2 weeks before the gala. The grid, the corridor footage, the email, and the piece that made her sit back a second time. And an honest little cleaning note that had flagged the exact room 3 weeks before her audit ever reached it. Written by someone the file listed only as night agency staff. Initials only, no full name. She wrote in her notebook, "Who is the cleaner?" and underlined it twice. Because Adenowasu had done this for 26 years, and she knew that the honest note in the dishonest file is never an accident. And she wanted to know whose eye had caught it, and she had a slow, cold suspicion. The kind you don't write down yet. That the person who had spotted this crime by its rhythm had spotted it, because they had felt that exact rhythm close around their own throat once before. She took the whole thing to the board's audit committee, still chaired, 3 years on, by the same careful Mr. Okonkwo, and Mr. Okonkwo, reading the file, went very quiet, because he remembered. He remembered a young woman at the far end of a cold table saying, "I lent my card, and I'm being set up in a voice that cracked wrong," and he remembered signing off on her guilt, and he remembered that he had not enjoyed it, and had done it well anyway. And he understood now, holding Adenwasu's grid, that doing an unjust thing well is worse than doing it badly. Because at least a badly done injustice leaves a seam. His had been seamless. He had helped make it seamless. The board decided to present the findings at the annual gala. This was Tunde's decision, and it was not sentimental. It was strategic and cold in a way that will matter. The bond investors would all be in the room. The press would be there. And getting ahead of a fraud publicly, showing the market that the Adeyemi Group cleaned its own house in the open, was worth more than a quiet firing. Funk would be there. She would be given no warning. And the auditors would present. Tunde did not know, walking into his own gala that night, that the fraud they were about to expose was the twin of the one that had taken Amara from him 3 years before. He had not connected them. He had spent 3 years not thinking about Amara Okoro at all, with the specific muscular effort of a man not thinking about the one thing, and he had convinced himself the effort was indifference. And Amara, who cleaned the 41st floor and had written one honest line on a log 3 weeks earlier and gone home to make breakfast, had been told by her agency that night staff were needed early. For the gallo extra hands, the building had to sparkle. Come at 9 instead of 11. Use the service entrance. Stay out of the guests' way. She came at 9. She used the service entrance, and at some point in the crush of a 500-person gala, a night cleaner in a grey uniform with a pregnant belly took a wrong corridor with a supply cart and came out into the wrong end of the main hall, the bright end, the jewelry case end, exactly as the guests were arriving, and Funkabalagan keyed up, brittle, closer to the edge, that night than anyone in that glittering room. Could see turned and saw a floor scrubber standing in her light. You already know the first 30 seconds of what happened next, because you watched it at the top of this story. The snap of the fingers, the rag thrown at the chest, the 30 guests who did not move. The man who turned away and sipped his wine. Now you know who everyone is, so let it play again, slower, and watch what it costs. A night shift floor scrubber wants to walk in here. Funka's voice went up and out, pitched to carry, because Funk had spent her whole life performing for whoever might be watching. And there were 200 people watching now. That belly, that necklace you fished out of a bin. You think you can slip into a party for real people? It was the necklace that had set her off. She hadn't even registered the face yet. She'd seen, on a cleaner, a thing that cleaners don't own, a fine chain, gold, old but real, and the wrongness of it had reached into Funk's chest and squeezed. Because Funk's entire life was built on the belief that the categories are fixed, that some people own fine things, and some people fish rags out of carts, and a cleaner wearing gold was a crack in the world's foundation. And she moved to seal it the way she sealed everything, by force, in front of an audience. Amara did not step back. That is the whole story in one sentence. And I want you to feel it before the machinery of justice takes over. Because the justice is going to be loud and satisfying. And it is not actually the point. The point is a woman who had been broken in a room 3 years before, who had every reason to fold, who had spent 3 years being scheduled for the hours the powerful sleep. That woman heard herself called a thing and did not step back. She laid one hand on her stomach, over Akeen's brother or sister, 4 months along now, and with the other hand she touched the chain at her throat, and she stood in the light she was not supposed to be standing in. Funk yanked the rag off the cart and threw it. Out, before I call security to drag that pregnant belly to the curb. Amara bent, picked up the rag, folded it, corner to corner the way she folded everything, and the folding was not submission. It was the opposite. It was a person refusing to be made frantic, refusing to give the audience the flailing they'd come to see. And then, and she did this slowly, she turned the back of the necklace up into the light. 2 letters, cut by hand into old gold. A.T. Tunde had given it to her the night of the reconciliation, weeks before the engagement, before he had words for what he felt. He'd had it made from a coin his father gave him, A&T Amara and Tunde. She had worn it for 3 years under her uniform, against her skin, the one thing she had not sold when her mother was dying, and she turned it up now, not to accuse anyone, not as a play. She turned it up because a woman being called a bin scavenger in front of 200 people reached, in her deepest reflex, for the one true thing she owned, the way you grab a railing. Tun stepped out of the elevator into his own gala. He saw, in this order, a commotion. Funk, a cleaner, a rag on the floor. Gold at the cleaner's throat catching the light, 2 letters. And then the face above the letters, older, thinner, harder, 3 years gone. The face he had spent 3 years not thinking about, with all his strength. The glass left his hand. Nobody saw him decide to drop it. His hand simply stopped being a thing that held objects. It hit the marble and burst, and the sound of it, a single hard crack, in a room full of soft party noise, turned every head. And for 1 second, the whole gala was silent, and looking at the founder of the Adeyemi group, standing frozen with his hand, still curled around a glass that was now in pieces at his feet, staring at a pregnant cleaner, as though she were a person returned from the dead, which to him she was. Amara, he said. Not Miss Okoro. It came out of him unmediated from underneath 3 years of construction's voice of the man in the cold jollof room. Amara. Funk's head snapped around, and across her face, for the first time in the whole story, something moved that she could not control, because Funk had built everything, every layer of it, on the certainty that Amara Okoro was gone, disgraced and vanished, and never coming back, a closed account. And here was Tunde saying her name like a wound reopening, and here was the necklace, and here Funk's mind was already sprinting ahead of the rest of the room. Here, tonight, was the audit. And for 1 vertiginous second Funka Balagun understood that she did not know how much anyone knew, and a person who has built everything on knowing exactly what everyone knows cannot survive the discovery that she has lost track. She recovered fast. She was good. Tun, do you know this woman? A small laugh, incredulous, generous. My God, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I just found her wandering the guest floor. She's clearly, the poor thing's clearly, not well. Look at her. We should call someone Vor. Stop talking, Tundity said. He did not raise his voice. That was somehow worse. He was walking toward Amara, now across the marble, glass crunching under his shoes, 200 people parting for him. And he stopped in front of her close enough to see that the necklace was real. That it was the necklace. And he looked at her belly, and then at her face, and something was breaking open in him in real time. And it was not a good feeling. It was the specific agony of a man realizing the ground he has stood on for 3 years was never there. Where did you go? He said quietly. Just for her. And Amara, who had rehearsed 1,000 versions of this moment in 1,002 a.m. offices and had believed every single time that she would be calm, was not calm. You called me Mzokoro, she said. Her voice shook. You sat at the head of the table, and you called me Mzokoro. And you asked if I had another explanation. And I looked at you, and you looked at the table. Each word cost her. I had another explanation, Tunde. I was carrying it. I was 4 weeks carrying your explanation, and I walked out of that room because I knew that nothing I said would ever be louder than her. She did not point at Funk. She didn't need to. Every true thing I said was going to sound like a better lie. So I stopped saying true things for 3 years. The room had gone from a party to something else. 200 people who had come for champagne and networking were standing in a widening silence around a cleaner and a billionaire. And at the edge of it, Mr. Okonkwo had gone white. Because he understood before anyone that the two things, the woman and the audit folder tucked under Ada Nwasu's arm across the room, were about to become one thing. It was Ada Nwosu who made them one thing. She had been standing near the small dais, where, in 20 minutes per the evening's careful program, she was to present the forensic findings to the board and the assembled investors. She had been watching the whole scene with her forensic patients, and she had heard the cleaner say she'd been convicted 3 years ago on a wire fraud scheme run through a borrowed access card. And Ada Nwosu, who had spent 2 years of her life reconstructing that exact scheme running live in this exact building, felt every hair on her arms stand up. She crossed the room. She did not hurry. Ada Nwosu never hurried. She stopped beside Tundi, and she said in a voice that was not loud, but had 26 years of not being charmed in it, Mr. Adeyemi, I think you should hear the audit now, not in 20 minutes now, and I think. She turned her steady eyes on Amara. This woman should stay in the room. What happened on that little dais over the next 15 minutes was not a magic trick. I want to be clear about that, because stories like this usually cheat. At the end, a secret twin, a deathbed confession, a letter that falls from a coat, there was none of that. What took Funke Balogun apart was the most ordinary thing in the modern world. Data kept by machines that don't take sides, read out by a 51-year-old woman with a notebook. Ada Nwosu did not accuse anyone at first. She simply presented. She put the Meridian Holdings payments on the screen and walked the room through the invoice rhythm, the 2-even sequence, and you could feel 200 financially literate people begin to lean forward, because they all knew that rhythm was wrong the second she showed it. She showed the 11 million, no, this time it was larger, 38 million, naira over 2 years, routed to a shell account. She showed the 31 wire authorizations, and then she showed the access cards. Each of these authorizations, she said, was made using an employee access card, 6 different employees, and each time, the employee whose card was used can be placed elsewhere in the building, or outside it entirely, by their own badge data at the exact minute of the transaction. She let that sit, which means, in every single case, someone was using a card that was not their own. She put up the grid. 6 cards, 31 transactions, every real card holder grayed out with an alibi. And then she put up the one figure who was never grayed out, present on the correct floor in the correct window 31 times out of 31. And she did not say a name. She let the room do the arithmetic. And the room, full of people who did arithmetic for a living, did it. And 200 heads turned, slowly, not toward the screen, but toward Funk Balogun, standing frozen by the champagne, with a glass she had forgotten she was holding. This is absurd, Funk said. Borrowed cards. Present in the building. Half this room was present in the building. This proves nothing. Ada, you know it proves nothing. You're right, Ada said. And something in the mildness of it was terrible. Presence alone proves nothing so. She nodded to the technician. The corridor camera outside the records room. 31 clip-outs, I'll show 3. The footage came up. The burned-in clock in the corner. The door of the records room. And Funk unmistakable. No ambiguity. Her walk, her posture. The borrowed card in her hand. Tapping in, coming out with a folder. 3 times. 3 different dates. 3 timestamps that matched 3 wire authorizations to the minute. The room made a sound. Not a gasp, something lower. The sound 200 people make when a thing they suspected becomes a thing they have seen. And finally, Ada said, and here she allowed herself, for the first and only time, something close to satisfaction. An email, sent in the 4th month, deleted the same afternoon from the sender's folder, preserved, as all correspondence was, under the legal hold for the bond issue. She put it on the screen. Funk's own careful words to her cousin. The delay, the too much attention, the need for quiet. The recipient is the registered owner of Meridian Holdings. He is the sender's first cousin. Funk Balogun stood in the light. She had thrown a rag at another woman for standing in, and the light did not spare her one detail. And here is the thing I most want you to see. The thing that is easy to miss under the sweetness of the comeuppance. Funk did not break down, she did not confess. Not really. She looked around that room, at 200 faces that had adored her an hour ago, and now looked at her the way that other room had once looked at Amara. And she reached instantly, by pure reflex, the way Amara had reached for the necklace len. She reached for the same weapon she had always used. Amara Okoro put those documents where you'd find them, Funk said, fast, pointing across the room. She's a convicted fraud. She cleans this building. She has access to everything. She planted this to frame me because she blames me for blunder. The cleaning log, said Adanawosu, is dated 3 weeks before my audit reached that room. It recommends review, and it is signed by agency initials, filmed by the lobby camera, logged in facilities. A person planting a frame does not file a dated note recommending that the documents be reviewed. She looked at Funkirk with 26 years of immunity to being charmed. You keep using her, even now. You used her card. You used her name. You used her 3 years ago to end an audit. And standing here, you reached for her again, before you reached for anything true. That is the tell, Miss Balogun. That has always been the tell. An innocent person reaches for the truth. You have reached for Amara Okoro every single time. It was Mr. Okonkwo who spoke then, and it cost him. You could see it cost him. He stood up in front of the whole gala, the careful man, and he said, 3 years ago, I chaired the committee that convicted this woman. He gestured at Amara of exactly this crime. I signed it. I did it thoroughly, and I was wrong. And I was wrong because the evidence had been built to make me wrong by the person standing there. And because it was easier to believe a butcher's daughter had stolen than to believe the colleague we all trusted. I want that on the record tonight, in this room, in front of these people. Because 3 years ago, we ended her in a private room with the door closed, and the least I can do is be wrong out loud in the light. where being wrong belongs. The security team was already moving. The board had counsel present, because Tunda planned everything. The police had been quietly notified before the presentation even began, because a fraud of this size is a crime and not merely a firing, and this is the no magic rule holding to the very end. Funk Balagan was not struck by lightning and did not fall on her own sword. She was arrested at a gala by 2 officers who read her the charges while 200 people watched, and she was walked out through the revolving door she had ordered Amara dragged out of, and the last thing anyone heard from her was not a confession and not an apology, but her voice, still performing, still pitched to carry, insisting to the officers that they had no idea who she was. She was right about that. They didn't. That was always the answer to her whole life. Nobody ever did. The gala did not recover, and nobody tried to make it. The investors left with a story better than any speech Tunde could have given them. A company that exposes its own rot in public, in real time, and the bond issue. In one of the small ironies the universe hands out, closed oversubscribed the following month. The market rewards a house that cleans itself in the open. Amara had been right about that 3 years ago, though nobody had let her say it. The truth, told in the light, is worth more than the lie kept quiet. It had just taken the building 3 years to learn what the accountant had always known. They cleared the hall, and in the emptying room, among the abandoned champagne flutes and the ground in glass, from a dropped tumbler, Tunde Adeyemi and Amara Okoro stood facing each other for the first time in 3 years with no table between them. He tried to speak and couldn't, then he did. "I have to say the thing," he said. "And then? You never have to hear from me again if you don't want to. I didn't believe you. I had one thing to do when the whole world was telling me you were guilty. I had to be the one person who knew you and didn't believe it. And I couldn't do it. I looked at the table. You said my name. And I looked at the table." His voice did something it had not done in front of another human being in 3 years. And I told myself for 3 years that the evidence made it reasonable. It did make it reasonable. That's the worst part. She built it well enough that not believing you was the reasonable choice. And I've learned exactly one thing since, and it's that when you love someone, being reasonable is not the job. The job is to be the one who doesn't look at the table. I had one job. I failed it in front of everyone. And then I failed it again in private every day. For 3 years. By not looking for you. Amara did not fall into his arms. I want to be honest about this ending, because the sweet lie would be that the necklace turns up, and the man says, sorry, and the years close over like water. They don't. Amara had built a whole self out of surviving what he did. She had a son named Praise who had never met his father. She had scrubbed the floor of this exact building for 11 months. Had dusted the photograph of the 2 of them at 2 in the morning. Had folded a rag corner to corner an hour ago, rather than give an audience the sight of her breaking. She was not going to dissolve now because the arithmetic had finally come out in her favor. I have a son, she said. His name is Ikeen. He's 3. She watched that land, watched Tund understand the shape and the timing of it, watched 3 years rearrange themselves behind his eyes. Praise. I named him Praise because I decided a life. This stripped down was going to have praise in it, if I had to make the praise myself. He doesn't know you. I'm not going to pretend the last 3 years didn't happen, because a screen finally showed the truth. The truth was always true. It was true in that room when you looked at the table. It didn't need a camera. I did. Her voice held. So no, Tunde, I'm not going to marry you tonight and cry into your jacket and let the music swell. I'm going to go home to my son, and tomorrow, or next week, if you want to earn something, you can start with him, at his level. slowly, and find out whether the man who couldn't look at me across a table can look at a 3-year-old who's never needed him and doesn't know he exists. That's the audit I care about now, not the one on the screen. And Tundi Ademi, who had built a monster of a company out of guilt and grief, who had everything the market can measure and had failed the one thing it can't, said the only correct thing, which was, okay, not a speech, not a plea. Okay, I'll start where you say and at the speed you say. It was the first time in the whole story he had let someone else hold the ledger. The restoration was not a fairy tale, and it was better than one, because it was real. The conviction was vacated, legally, formally, in a courtroom, on the strength of Ada Nwosu's grid, and the corridor footage, and the archived email, and one honest cleaning log. Amara Okoro's name was cleared in the same public record that had ruined it, which is the only place clearing a name actually counts. The company paid her 3 years of the salary she'd have earned, plus damages, because Tunde's own counsel advised it, and because Tunde would have paid 10 times it, and been grateful for the chance. She took it. She was not too proud. Pride had been beaten out of her in a cold room 3 years before, and what grew back did not care about the optics of accepting what you are owed. She used part of it to buy her mother a proper headstone, the kind with room for a full name and both dates and a line beneath. And on the line she had them carve knock knock, the account balanced, and only 3 people in the world would ever understand it. And that was enough. Funk Balagon was convicted. No lightning, no karma as magic. Just the slow, grinding certainty of 31 time-stamped clips, and an email she thought she'd deleted. She got 7 years and full restitution she would spend the rest of her life failing to pay. And in the one moment the story allows itself something like mercy, Amara went to see her once, in the visiting room, and did not gloat and did not forgive, because forgiveness was not owed, and gloating was beneath her. She went for one reason, and she said one thing. You told that room I stole because my mother was sick. She was sick. She died. And you used the one true thing you knew about me to bury me. She stood up to leave. I just wanted you to see the face of the person you were so sure would never come back. That's all. I wanted you to know the categories aren't fixed. That's the thing you never believed, and it's the thing that ruined you. Some cleaner is always wearing gold under the uniform. Funk. You just never bothered to look. She did not wait for an answer. There wasn't going to be a good one. Ikeen met his father slowly, at his own level, over months, the way Amara had demanded. Tunda did not buy the boy's affection. Amara would not have permitted it, and he understood, finally, that permission mattered. He showed up. He was on time. He learned that praise liked to line his toy cars up in a perfect row and press his thumb against the floor. When the row was straight, knock, a habit no one had taught him. A habit that had come down through a butcher's stall ledger and a night shift cleaning log into the hands of a 3-year-old. And the first time Tundi saw the boy do it, he had to leave the room. And Amara let him go and did not follow. And when he came back, his eyes were red, and neither of them said anything, and something, very carefully, began. They did not marry for a long time, and when they did it was small, and Amara wore the necklace on the outside of her dress for once. A and T in old gold, catching the light in a room where nobody would ever again tell her she didn't belong in it. But that is not where I'll leave you. Because a wedding is the easy image, and this was never an easy story. I'll leave you in the lobby of the Adeyemi group, months before any of the soft ending at 4 in the morning, when it was still just a night cleaner and an empty building. Because on the last night Amara worked her shift. She finished the rotation properly. She was a professional to the end. She would not walk off a job half done, even that one. She cleaned the 41st floor one final time, and she picked up the photograph on the shelf to dust beneath it, the two of them laughing over a closed reconciliation a lifetime ago. And she did not put it back at the exact angle. This time, she turned it very slightly, so it faced the room instead of the window, so that anyone who came in would see it. And then she signed the cleaning log, the same log that had already done more than she'd ever know. And under the last room she wrote, out of pure habit, the small true note of a person who had spent her whole life leaving honest records in files. Nobody reads. Floor 41 complete. Nothing out of place. I want to say something before you go in my own voice, because this one stayed with me while I was telling it. The part that I keep turning over isn't the fraud or the cameras, it's the schedule. How a building can be honest enough to put the poor to work in the hours the rich are asleep, so that the two of them share every floor and never once share a room. Amara wasn't invisible because of magic. She was invisible because we build the world to make her that way. And then we're shocked when the woman with the mop turns out to have carried the whole answer the entire time. So here's the only thing I'll ask of you tonight. Tomorrow, look at the person cleaning the floor, driving the car, carrying the tray. Learn one name. Because dignity isn't something a camera restores at the end of the story. It's something we owe people at the beginning, before we know who they are, before the gold shows under the uniform. If you or someone you love is being pushed out of a workplace on a lie, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is real, and it answers. If an older person you love is being controlled through their money, the National Council on Aging Helpline, 1-800-677-111-SUCKS, is real too. Write one of those down for someone. And if this story meant anything to you, tell me in the comments the name of one person you decided to really see this week. She was invisible because we build the world to make her that way. And then we're shocked when the woman with the mop turns out to have carried the whole answer the entire time. So here's the only thing I'll ask of you tonight. Tomorrow, look at the person cleaning the floor, driving the car, carrying the tray. Learn one name, because dignity isn't something a camera restores at the end of the story. It's something we owe people at the beginning, before we know who they are, before the gold shows under the uniform. If you or someone you love is being pushed out of a workplace on a lie, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is real, and it answers. If an older person you love is being controlled through their money, the National Council on Aging Helpline, 1-800-677-111-SUCKS, is real too. Write one of those down for someone. And if this story meant anything to you, tell me in the comments the name of one person you decided to really see this week.